Ring! When a sequel is released nowadays, you expect it to be mostly the same as its predecessor, with nicer graphics and some tweaks to the gameplay to sort out some of its flaws. It's a surprise then, when you play a game like Darksiders 2, that while keeping to the foundation of the original game, radically adds to and reconfigures it into something quite different. The original Darksiders was a great game, but felt like it was drawing a lot from other games. The changes made to Darksiders 2 feels like, for better or worse, it has an identity of its own. The original Darksiders was a love child of Zelda, God of War, Devil May Cry, and in one section even Portal of all things. Meshed these elements together well, which combined with a unique plot premise, made for an enjoyable game. Darksiders 2 has kept the base foundation of the game, while moulding it into something unique. You still solve puzzles to progress through dungeons, you still rack up ridiculous combos while fighting enemies, and you still execute them in a grim fashion. However, the violence is toned down, and combat is more like that of an action RPG, and you'll be using the unique abilities of Death and some new items to progress through many more dungeons scattered through the world. The world is probably one of the biggest changes to the game. For one, it's huge, totaling about 3 times the size of the original Darksiders, and actually requires you to travel on horseback as a horseman should. There's enemies to fight on your travels, and a variety of collectibles to go out and find through exploration and platforming. It makes the world feel more alive and engaging, and not just some dungeons separated by corridors. The world is also a different side to the Darksiders world for the most part. It's not the ruined post-Armageddon world of the original, it's the lands that coexist with ours. The Forge Land, where the Makers seek to fight the corruption plaguing the land. The Land of the Dead, where souls of those past fight for new life or live out their deaths in torment. The Heavenly Lost Light Outpost, and more. The lore of the Darksiders world fills in the gap between dungeons and story sequences, establishing more of an identity for the franchise. You're probably wondering what exactly I mean when I keep saying Darksiders 2 keeps to the foundation of the original while still being different. The best comparison I can think of is the transition from Assassin's Creed to Assassin's Creed 2. The gameplay felt familiar while being tweaked and improved, and I have to say, the sequel lost some of the feel of the original, but was made a better product in the end from the changes. The same could be said of Darksiders 2. It's not as dark as the original a lot of the time. There's still executions and some gore, but a lot of the darkness is toned down. There's not as much blood spilled, the currency is gold now as opposed to enemy souls, keyholes don't flow blood when unlocked, and so on. The first world of the game, the Forge Lands, shows a more peaceful and intact world than the original, where corrupted beings spill shadow essence rather than blood. But eventually you move through locales like the City of the Dead and even down to Earth at one point, and the feel of the original comes back. You'll see tormented souls, angels slain spilling blood, and Hell's minions storming the Earth by the game's end. The gameplay feels slightly different at times, but in my opinion has improved, though those not after an RPG experience might not agree. In fact, I'd argue that the game should very much be classified as an RPG. The combat works like it did in the original. Different weapons, racking up high hit combos, special abilities, and now you have weapon effects, stats, and skill points to worry about. You get experience from killing enemies and completing quests, which makes you level up and improve stats. You also get a skill point to place in an ability. The abilities belong to one of 2 skill trees, Harbinger, which revolves around combat moves and defense buffs, and Necromancer, which utilizes defense buffs and summonable minions. It's impossible to fully level every ability on one save file, so you need to specialize. I specialized mostly in the Necromancer tree and found its abilities not only helpful, but outright essential at times. The ability to have minions attacking foes and diverting attention from you was invaluable. The attacking abilities from the Harbinger tree not so much, since I was already dealing acceptable damage. The buffs from the Harbinger tree were more useful than the Necromancers though. Both trees are definitely viable, it's up to your preference, much like the weapons you'll be finding as loot among armor pieces. There are a variety of weapons: scythes, Death's primary weapon, and a secondary weapon which you can pick from 2 categories: fast, which covers gauntlets, bucklers and the like, and slow, which covers weapons like axes and hammers. I personally didn't like slow weapons and stuck to the fast claw-like weapons because of their speed and effects. Their equipped armor and weapons have effects, like improving strength, raising your chance of a critical hit, and so on. You can use combinations of these to fit your playstyle. I used high critical chance equipment, with weapons that healed me upon landing a critical hit. This, combined with my minions and strength and critical boosting abilities, made me a force to be reckoned with. The game pretty much throws loot at you, and it seems unnecessary at times, since you find ones you like, and they don't often need improving. You can sell them, but all you need money for is more items, and more combat moves, which I found unnecessary. I was playing on normal, the middle of 3 difficulties, and I found I could manage the game without upgrading my equipment very often, save for a few harder encounters later in the game. One interesting use I did discover for extra loot was the possessed weapons. These are weapons you can sacrifice items to give them experience, and when they level up their attributes increase, and you can add a new boost from one of the items sacrificed to it. I didn't find many of these weapons, but I feel they're the real reason for the seeming excess of loot, and are an interesting idea. Quests are a big part of RPGs, as they're what tie the story and plot together. Like the original, Darksiders 2 doesn't have much plot, so to speak, until towards the end, but through the quests it does provide more of a reasoning for each dungeon. However, sometimes it feels a bit fetch questy, in that it feels like it sends you to places for no real reason other than to make you visit a dungeon. There's one section in which I essentially completed a dungeon to meet someone, but was told I couldn't see them until I proved my worth in an arena. In the arena, I was told I need to find 3 gems inside to awaken the boss. I cleared the arena and met the person, only to be told that they wouldn't help me until I recruited 3 of their allies. Each of these allies is inside a dungeon, and in one of these I was told they would only join me if I brought him 3 souls from within the dungeon, and I think you get my drift. I mean, the game was enjoyable, so I didn't mind, but it felt a bit obvious at times that there really wasn't much reason for me to be doing these dungeons. There were side dungeons which I went out of my way to find and explore, so I felt like if the main quest was condensed a bit, with some of the dungeons used in it tied to side quests or left as exploration incentive, the game would have been even more enjoyable. The game does have side quests, which are usually fetch quests or boss fights, and are nice distractions to complete during the main quest. The dungeons themselves are fun, and there's only 1 or 2 that really felt like they outstayed their welcome. To progress through them, you need to utilize items you find within or nearby, like guns, a grappling hook, and some more unique surprises to solve puzzles, with some combat in between, before confronting a big boss enemy at the end. They even brought back the portal gun. This formula sounds very Zelda-esque, but Darksiders 2 has something that sets it apart, other than improved combat, namely Death's abilities. Death is much more acrobatic than his brother War, which makes for some interesting platform challenges of sorts. You'll have to grind across walls, ride golems, and leap across gaps in order to reach the dungeon's end. There seems to be as much of a focus on platforming puzzles as item use, sometimes seemingly more so. You'll have to utilize more than just the item you just received to progress, which keeps it interesting. And no dungeon would be complete without a boss. There's a mixture of them, some being purely combat focused, others requiring wits as well, and some... take a look for yourself. There's some huge epic boss fights in the game, usually marking the end of an area or plot arc. The variety of the bosses and puzzles keep the game interesting, relying on a mastery of item use, platforming, and the game's combat. The game's presentation is something that probably won't get mentioned much, but I think it's something worth mentioning. The HUD and menus have been prettied up from the first game, and the map, inventory, etc. are now in the same menu screen. It's obvious what the purpose of each screen is, and it's easy to navigate. One thing the game doesn't point out very often is how to equip your abilities and items. It tells you once, and occasionally on loading screens, but not anywhere in a menu, and there's no option to look at previously mentioned tutorial messages. Since at the beginning of the game when it tells you don't need to do this often, you forget and can't remember how to do it. For reasons like this, it would be nice if you could recheck the tutorial messages the game tells you whenever you feel like, rather than just being told on loading screens. A nice touch to the menus is a short cutscene of sorts recapping the last plot event when you load a save file. This then leads into a second main menu of sorts, which is actually a view of the place you saved the game in, and you immediately resume control of death once you hit continue. I've also encountered a few glitches, such as a boss deciding he didn't want to fight anymore, bombs getting stuck in floors, unable to be picked up, and a golem getting stuck in the air, which I eventually fixed by moving areas and reloading, but it's still annoying to be confronted with something unintended that hinders your progress. There's also some longish loading screens every now and then, when you enter new areas and reload after dying, but that's to be expected of a game of this size. Screen tearing was also present occasionally, but I'm not sure whether that was my recording equipment or not, though I don't think it was. The game's music is a beautiful soundtrack, with tracks that really fit the moment, especially in some of the big boss battles. Although some of the tracks do have a similar sound to those of the Assassin's Creed series, though that is expected given the composer. It's his style of music after all. All in all, Darksiders 2 is an incredibly enjoyable game with a lot of content to last you a while, Among all the main quests, there's also side quests, an arena mode, and even a new game plus for you to check out, so there's always plenty for you to do. It's most certainly done the original game justice. Darksiders 2 is faithful to the original, so I'd recommend it to fans of the first game. It's also worth a look into if you like games like Devil May Cry, Zelda, and action RPGs like Dragon's Dogma. Without hesitation, I give Darksiders 2 a thumbs up. It has a few flaws, but they certainly didn't impact me enough to prevent me from enjoying the game, and the improvements it offers over the original are too great to ignore. Well, that's all that needs to be said, but remember, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below, a private message, or on my Twitter. Remember, in China, they never grow chili. So long!